Well, as Tom said, yeah, hopefully I have the best title. Well, the only one anyway that mentions sex, drugs, and liberty, three of my favourite topics, as you can imagine. Well, what we're really talking today about is prohibitions, as Tom said. So the idea that in somewhere in the world, each of the following activities or each of the following substances are illegal. So prostitution is one example. Prostitution is illegal in large parts of the world, most of the Arab world, the Middle East, most of the United States, some parts of Europe, and Sweden also, which is part of Europe, of course. Then let's ask a quick question. Do people know what the legal status of prostitution is in the UK? Is it legal or illegal? Any ideas? Yes, I think that's broadly right. So prostitution is legal. So it would be legal for me to pay someone to have sex with me or vice versa. What would be illegal is for someone who was paying me to have sex with them to pay somebody else to, say, provide some sort of service to them. That would be illegal. So any third-party involvement in prostitution is illegal. But prostitution itself is legal. It's also illegal as it happens for more than two prostitutes to work together in the same premises. So 3 prostitutes in one building is illegal. So what you find in many of these areas that there are, if you like, grey markets. So things may normally be legal or illegal, but there's grey areas in between the two. So prostitution is one activity that's illegal in large parts of the world. Pornography is another one, though it's less prohibited than prostitution, perhaps oddly. Recreational drugs, as we all know, are illegal in many countries. Alcohol is illegal in most of the Middle East, large parts of the Muslim world, legal in the Western world. Amphetamine, cannabis, cocaine, ecstasy, heroin, LSD, marijuana are illegal in most of the world. Gambling, again, is illegal in many countries, legal in others. Gun ownership, boxing are less frequently prohibited. Any ideas in which countries is boxing illegal? Any ideas? 2 European countries, boxing's illegal in Sweden and Norway. It used to be illegal in Cuba, but it's not anymore. It's been legalized in Cuba. So the question really today is prohibition a good thing? What are the arguments for and against prohibition? And because we're short of time, we're going to concentrate on the arguments against prohibition, why prohibition might be a bad thing. And I want to begin with a moral argument against prohibition. This moral argument begins from a conception of individual rights or individual liberty. It begins from the idea that individuals have a right of self-ownership. Now, a question that arises perhaps there is, where does this right of self-ownership come from? Well, there's 2 possible sources. One would be an idea about natural rights. So the idea that everybody has rights that they're born with as a person. And those rights are not dependent upon government or upon other people recognising them. They're simply rights that we all have as people. That would be a basis for self-ownership. The second source of rights would be simply the idea that people act as if other people have rights. So the idea that if people recognise other people as having self-ownership, then people acquire self-ownership. So that suggests that rights require some sort of social contract, some sort of recognition by other people that people have those rights. And that's the sort of idea, as any of you who study political philosophy, that's the sort of basis of rights that John Rawls provides in his theory of justice. The first category of rights would be the sort that Robert Nozick would suggest in Anarchy, State and Utopia. So there's 2 possible sources of rights, we might say. Now, if individuals do have those rights, then it means that people can do whatever they want. The one caveat to that is they can't infringe the rights of other people. So as long as people consent, as long as people choose to engage in certain activities, then it's their decision to do so. Now, the grey area that arises here is the notion of harm to others. When do my actions impact on other people? Now, it can be argued, and it is argued, that if I choose to spend all day sat at home drinking, rather than contributing positively to society, that impacts on other people. And there's an argument you can make that that will be some sort of harm to others, some sort of rights infringement. But I think really the grey areas are less grey than they might think. And what we're really talking about is rights infringements. So I think there's a qualitative difference between me hitting somebody, say, striking somebody, and me choosing to live my life in a certain way. I think actually there's a clear distinction that we can intuitively recognise. And another example might be that most people would agree, I assume, that we can't simply take somebody's organs forcibly for transplant. So we all don't need 2 kidneys. You can live with 1 kidney. Most people recognise that it's wrong to take someone's kidney against their will, give it to somebody who might need them. I think because it's a clear invasion of their body, it's a clear rights infringement. So I'd argue that we can separate between direct harms to others and other activities that impact on others but are not harms. So on this basis, I'd argue we can construct a moral argument against prohibition. And that argument is very straightforward. It's that people have a right of self-ownership, and that a right of self-ownership means we can choose to do what we want with our bodies. So we can choose to take drugs, we can choose to gamble, we can choose to engage in prostitution, we can choose to appear in pornography. As long as we don't directly harm others, then that's our right to do what we want. Now, for me, the argument really begins and ends there, in a sense. I think once you make a moral argument and it's compelling, which I believe it is, that to me that's the end of the discussion. But what's quite clear is that most people don't agree with that point of view. Most people find that unsatisfactory. And that dissatisfaction, I think, is because of the notion that if we legalise, say, tomorrow, if we pressed the button and we immediately legalised all drugs, prostitution completely, pornography, which is illegal, gambling, all activities right around the world, people believe that there will be harmful consequences. People believe that you'd have people falling down the street out their heads on heroin on a regular basis. So in other words, the practical question then arises. What would actually happen if we did legalise these activities? And I want to try and address the argument almost inversely by looking at the practical consequences of prohibition. So I want to say, what are the practical consequences of prohibition and what might that imply for legalisation? And I want to highlight in the remaining part of the talk 6 basic consequences of prohibition, 6 things that happen when we prohibit activities. Let me ask another question. I realise that the picture's not great from this distance, but anybody any idea who this gentleman is here? Yeah, it's Pablo Escobar, who was the head of the Medellin drug cartel that imported cocaine from Colombia into the United States. And Pablo Escobar was quite famous in the 1990s, not least because he appeared on the Forbes list of the world's richest people. And he appeared 7th on the list with a personal fortune of $20 billion. Now that is an illustration of the sort of money that criminal enterprises make from drugs. And that's because when you prohibit an activity, you do away with the market, essentially. You drive an enormous wedge between the cost of production and the selling price. And that enables criminal enterprises to make exceptional profits from selling usually drugs, but it can also be from engaging in prostitution as well, and gambling for that matter. So if one looks at most of the big criminals who have been extraordinarily successful, their success has been tied to prohibition, whether it's Al Capone in America in the 1920s or Pablo Escobar in the 1990s in Colombia and in America. Prohibition really makes criminals rich. It's the thing, criminals more than anybody love prohibition.